These are the paints I've used in this video. For painting fire, I'll be using this Egyptian Brazier from the Necropolis set by Maxmini. I've already painted the flames white, which doubles as a way to have a bright poppy colour and for the hottest part of the flame. I have a second one here which I have already painted and will use as a guide. Using Capri Sunshine Yellow and mixing with some Glaze Medium, we can begin to paint towards the tops of the flames, making sure to paint all the sides of the flames as we go. Leave a portion of the white shown near the bottom of the flames. Looking at my real world example of a campfire I made, we can see how the flame goes from white to yellow to orange at the edges of the flames. Layering up our glazes will give us a realistic blend of colours to match the look of the flames. Once you have the flames painted, leave it to dry before we move to the next step. Once the glaze is dry, we can add another layer, starting the brush stroke higher up the yellow section. This will begin making the yellow stronger further up the flame, giving a nice blend from white to the yellow. If you think you've left a little too much white shown in areas, you can begin covering that up here, which will give the flame an uneven banding, again, which is more realistic. You can also focus on small sections to have more intense colour to give some nice variation. Wait for the glaze to dry again, and if you want to add more, you can. Once the yellow is to your liking, make a glaze of Boo Yeah Orange and Glaze Medium. With this glaze, we want to paint even further up the flames, around the edges of the tendrils of fire. This model in particular gives a great look for layered flames. Smaller flames that only reach part way up the fire gives a bit of visual interest, even if you don't focus painting on some smaller sections. Allow this glaze to dry before moving on. Now we can develop the orange layer further by focusing on the higher points of the flames. The orange glazes work well over the yellow layers to create a natural flame look, rather than a cartoon effect fire, which would have very clear changes between the colours. Allow this layer to dry before applying any further ones. Make a thin glaze of Viscera Red and Glaze Medium. We are going to be very sparing with this glaze, and we'll only use one pass of it, because we don't really want red on the flame, but the thinness of the glaze will give the tips of the flames a darker orange tint, that we only get through using a thin red glaze. Focus only on the tips of the flames. Once the glaze is dry, we'll take our gloss varnish and apply it to the flames. Gloss varnish will make the colours really pop, and the light catching the model will give the effect of the hotter parts of the flames flying up, like we saw with the example photo I showed earlier. Here's the final result of the Egyptian Brazier. We can see how the Viscera Red glaze gives us a deeper orange result than a red one, which is exactly what we want for the cooler part of the flame. I don't like adding black or grey to my fire effects to give the impression of smoke, unless I'm wanting to give the effect of a dirty burn, like a burning oil drum, which would have a thick, acrid smoke. Using the same technique but giving more space for the white part of the flame makes the fire look like it's burning even hotter, like I did with Mythos from Rumble Slam. I also use the fire technique in his mouth and eyes, making him look really demonic. In these examples, I don't show the white of the flames on the top of the ornate staves, as it would be covered by the cup section, whereas on the burning torch, the burning point is visible. On these fire-breathing models, I took the approach of the oxygen in the exhale feeding the flames, making it burn hotter. So I keep the colours starting further away from the fire source. And with the gecko fire breather, I add a glow to the throat as if that's the point of ignition, and we get a subdermal glow effect. The fire effect can also be used for burning brands, like on this Dagon demagogue. However, as the brand would be held into the flame, that end of the pole is going to be the hottest point of the brand, which is the top of the symbol. And with the furnace, on the molten steel, the slag is settled to the top, hardening and turning black. Around this I use the red glaze a little more, but the sheer heat from the molten steel gives the clear areas more white and yellow. I also noticed it's similar to the embers of a campfire, like in this reference image. When I first started trying to get a flame technique I was happy with, I started with this Yeetle model, where I tried to give the fireball a rippling effect like a tiny sun. However, I didn't use highly saturated colours, so the fire doesn't look as bright as it could do. And finally, the painting technique in this video can also be used to paint any type of flame, just by changing the colours used. Here I use mauve and purple for the fight white, light and saturated blue for Senora Muerte, and fluorescent yellow and green for Hollow Gordo.